Thank you very much for the opportunity to present to you today. When I was asked to come and give this presentation, the topic of discussion that it was outlined to me was, how do you create more value in retail podiums, and how do you use the Zhongtian projects that we're doing as your case study? So what I wanted to do this morning was to walk through kind of the history from our perspective of how do you create value in the base of these large mega projects that we begin seeing not just in Guiyang but throughout the world. I think one of the challenges that we face in these high-density mixed-use developments is how do you create great people places? How do you create great opportunities for development? How do you squeeze more value out of that podium? Because in many areas, the tower and the podium are approximately the same size. We've lived with this history of the tower being our icons. They are the elements that bring us to cities. They are the buildings that allow us to create this new urban landscape that we're creating throughout Asia. And I think here in the United States and in other parts of the world, we'll start seeing that densification occurring. So the lessons, and I think the comment that you just made about how we bring this knowledge back to the United States and other markets that we're working in is very important. So how do we create high-density mixed-use development in this area where our cities are going to become more important, land is going to become more scarce, and we're going to have to use our resources more wisely? So the challenges that we face is, how do we bring the needs of the tower in alignment with the needs of the podium? And there's many different types of approaches we can take, but we all come from our point of specialty. And therefore, the podium becomes the fabric that begins to tie these elements together. And if we do it right, we can create a great opportunity for the developer in the city. And if we do it wrong, we create a drain on the project itself. So we need to optimize the site area and the land utilization. We need to find that right balance between the urban and rural development. And we also need to address the forces of climate change in how we handle our towers and podiums. The iconic, these are the images that I love, Rockefeller Center, the Chrysler Building, the World Trade Center. Why were these buildings successful? Because they were part of the city, that they were part of the urban grid and the streets and the fabric, and they were a natural element within the city itself. Yeah, got to get it up. So then we evolved into mixed use. You know, the World Trade Center itself, the original World Trade Center was a pair of towers, and it wasn't until Battery Park City came into play that it really got the base that it needed to be part of the urban fabric and the urban image of New York City. As we move into Tokyo with Roppongi Hills and other developments, we really begin to find the importance of how the retail podium begins to work within this environment. So in many ways, the creation of towers, I always view it as it's a science. It's a very precise science of how do you deal with the core, how do you deal with the structure, how do you deal with the aerodynamics of the tower itself, how do you really begin to shape and craft this iconic vision. And many of our clients selected architects because of that iconic value that is created in that science. So I look at it as, how do you bring the science and the art of these two forces together, the vertical tower and the horizontal development? How do we begin to make this the heart of how we begin to bring mixed use together? Retail is the heart. And as we design these podiums, we have to think about the retail, and we have to evolve with these trends in retail to make sure that we're designing podiums that are state-of-the-art, have the ability to change, and are able to move as the markets move over the life of the investment in the building. Reston Town Center, within our own world of Callison RTKL, I always come back to Reston Town Center to say it was one of the iconic projects that actually created a Main Street. It was the one that came back and said, you know what, Main Street's not such a bad thing. Let's look at how we can begin to create that retail fabric to tie the urban district together. You go to Reston today, and I joined RTKL in 1984 when we were working on Reston Town Center, and you go back almost 30 years later, and Reston is still a very iconic project within Virginia. Siam Paragon, a shopping center in Bangkok that we designed for the mall group, a very important project in which we lifted the podium of the retail up to align with the rail station. Thus, it really created extra value under the podium of the building for the client itself. So it really is all in how we mix this together. The city crossing projects in Shenzhen, I think, were very important in the evolution of the mixed-use center and in China. And a lot of the lessons that we learned early in these days were translated into the higher density development that we're working on with the Zhongtian group in Guiyang. The element of the mixed projects, though, is the sites are kind of independently led. The sites haven't merged together. The elements of the tower and the podium haven't come together yet to create a more complicated mix. And so the office tower site, the mall site, and the lifestyle and hotel site are all kind of treated as independent bases within the city fabric. So as more and more uses are getting introduced, and I think the Zhongtian group and our projects in Guiyang want to introduce cultural elements into the project as well, more entertainment elements, and really begin to bring a more 24-hour, 7-day-a-week equation that we talk about in mixed-use development to physical reality. So how do we bring these two elements together? How do we bring the science of the tower and the art of the retail development to create that value? And I think that's the challenge that we're facing in China, and I think as you probably go to many of the presentations today, that same conversation will be happening in the Middle East and North America and other parts of the world. The towers are iconic. They create value in the fact they're a great landmark and they're a great place to work. Most of these towers range anywhere from 300,000 to 400,000 square meters, and they occupy probably 20,000 people will be living and working in those buildings. So you have 20,000 customers that are already on site to help drive your retail performance. But when you do the transaction on a retail tower, you get to do the rent once. You get a value of one when you do that deal in the office building. But podiums add the experience, the experience and the lifestyle value. The workers today really want to be in a great place to be able to live their daily lives in the workplace environment. So it provides that transition from the city to the building. It syncs up with the urban culture and its context. And what you'll find as we work around the world, we have to respect and respond to local conditions, but also within those local markets, people want international retailing expertise and opportunities. We can also up the value curve in these buildings by how we design that retail podium anywhere to 6 to 8 times that value that you would get in the tower. So if we get it right, we can create a lot more value for the development community than if we get it wrong. So it's the science and the art. How do we bring these private spaces with the public realm, maximize the tall building efficiency and the vision for the development? So we want to look at how we extend the day in that podium tower, and that we need to start looking at a variety of elements in how we begin to create that tower. It's not just about creating trays of retail that are connected by vertical transportation. It really is about addressing the social needs. It's a place where people can gather and relax and enjoy their day. It's an environmental environment. It's a place where we create a unique sense of place and identity so that people will come back to it over many generations. It's a place that's capable of handling a diverse array of offerings, and it's flexible enough to allow for change in the retail marketplace. And lastly, it's cultural. We need to respect the local context and culture, and we also need to bring cultural elements into the building itself. It's not just about retail, it is about the cultural aspects of the city. Okay. So key factors when we looked at the Zhongtian site. One, it's the connections. How do we begin to connect into the local community? How do we begin to anchor the tenants? How do we begin to break up the functional identities? How do we create verticality to encourage people to move up through the retail environment? Because in Asia today, our rule has always been 4-story tower is probably the most efficient, or excuse me, not tower, but 4-story mall is about the most efficient retail environment that you can create. But our developers are coming to us wanting more density, more development, more value, 6, 8, 10, even in some instances in Taipei, 11 stories of retail within the podium of a mixed-use development. So the verticality, how we move people up and through that development is very key. And then finally, the retailer's relationship to the mall. In our business, the retail is what drives the retail environment. Thus, we have to make an environment where the retailer can do their work. So looking at the Guiyang Riverside Theatre project, SOM and RTKL, excuse me, I've got to learn to do it myself, Callis and RTKL, we worked together on this site. It was a master planning competition. I think that was ultimately won by SOM, but we were asked to look at the mixed-use retail development along the riverside edge. And so I think that relationship worked very well, and how can we work together with the vertical tower that was created to create more value for the developer on the site. As we talk about Guiyang, it's an interior provincial city. It is a third-tier city. It's one where the national government is investing a lot of time and energy to begin to reverse the urbanization that is occurring within China to the coastal cities. Plus, the coastal cities, they really are beginning to be maxed out. They have firmly established infrastructure. They have firmly established industrial base. They are the powerhouses that have been driving the Chinese economy. And the central government realizes that they need to open up the interior of the country in order to be able to create more opportunities for the people in these inland provinces. And Guiyang is also, it's a very hilly province, so the land availability is actually quite low. In looking at this site, once again, we have a very unique riverfront opportunity. We have water, we have mountains, we have hills, we have green space. But we also have to create a fairly dense development in this hub in an old city. So as we look at how do we begin to create this added value, how do we look at the existing context to be able to create this value in the retail podium? We don't want to create just a big pancake of buildings that occupies the site. So we want to look at how we can bring the landscape resource into the site through connections in the public realm. We want to look also at how we can bring roads and infrastructure into the development to break it down, give it scale, provide accessibility. And we find that once you create great retail streets, you create internal value in the site, because those storefronts and that visual opportunity is very important as we bring people into the urban fabric. And then also, how do we begin to look at the retail storefronts along the riverfront and the roads to create that value? We also need to look at how we access these buildings. High-density development requires a lot of transit options for us. Roads, buses, metros, all of the elements that bring people to the site. My view's always been on a retail development around transit. If people can't get in and they can't get around, they're never going to come back. So how we use the existing road access, how we provide the necessary drop-off points, how do we make sure that the shoppers know to get from the transport mode to the entrance of the retail, that we've got key lines of sight and key access points to begin to animate these retail projects are very important as people circulate through and around and on the site. So we have to look at this urban experience, because we are basically getting people out of transport and putting them on their foot, and we want people to walk past the retail. Retail also is a social act. People want to walk, they want to browse, they want to window shop, they want to eat. They need to know how to get through the retail center in order to do all these things. So how we begin to place the high-end retail to create entrances and anchors into the retail complex, and then how do we begin to elevate the value of the retail within the diagram is very important. So how we look at anchor stores, how we look at mini anchors, how we look at retail shops, food and beverage, cultural facilities are all very important. The other aspect, too, of this site is that it begins to blend the various districts of the city together. It's not just a project, it's an urban core. It's a new urban core. And so it's very important that we begin to provide these linkages to the innovation districts, the cultural plazas, the cultural districts, and the other land use elements that are located around this development. In many ways, the Zhongtian's development is going to become the bow tie, the knot of the tie, if you will, of this district. So we also need to look at how we draw people up through the shopping center, how we begin to place the ice rink, the entertainment, the food and beverage offer higher up in the development, but high enough that people can see it, they know it's up there, and they will travel to it. And how we begin to look at escalatoring and elevatoring systems to be able to get people up. Our goal, I mean, when you look at a traditional shopping mall, a 4-story mall, Those first two stories are where the high-value retail lies. But what we want to do is we want to push that retail value up higher in the shopping environment. We want to put stores that would typically go on a second level, we want to put them on a fourth level or a fifth level, because that's how we begin to create the value in the real estate of the retail podium. How do we create identity and presence? I think it's always a challenge when you look at any retail project. How do you bring the local culture into the project, but also how do you create an iconic value in a building that is actually horizontal versus vertical? I'm not saying that it's easier to do it in a vertical building, but I am saying that it's a bigger challenge to create this urban fabric, to create that iconic vision of a project within a community. What we find in China is sometimes people want more traditional cultural overlay on their projects, but sometimes they come back and say they want something new, modern, and fresh. And I think how we create that image of these buildings of the future will come back to us in how we begin to develop projects throughout the world. We also got to recognize that we're recreating this local community, but we're doing it in a vertical way. That we have people living on site, we have people working on site, we have people who are coming to enjoy and experience the retail environment. So we are creating a true community. And as in China, we run out of more and more land to develop, we're going to see more and more verticality in how we begin to create developable vertical schemes that are investable. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we all face, is making these projects work. So in closing, I just wanted to go through some of the trends that we see and how we begin to affect the retail marketplace in the development of these high-value, high-performance podiums. One, I think it's the influence of hospitality. People are not just coming to shopping centers to shop, they're coming to shopping centers to hang out. They're coming to sit and enjoy. They have Wi-Fi, they have food and beverage, they have all the things they want to be able to enjoy that space. So we really have to look at hospitality and what we can draw from the hospitality industry to make these environments more memorable. The retailers are stocking what people are talking about. The fact that we can tweet, or we can, in Asia we use WeChat, we can talk about what things are going on in a place, and people will go to that shop because they want to see what's there. And people want to see customizable projects. I recently went and used the Trunk Club, which I thought was a very interesting experience. And you can see what you want to buy online, or you can go visit your stylist. You could do all these things, and your clothes immediately come to you. Tenant Design. More and more tenants, particularly in China, we're finding there are tenants that we've never heard of before, and they are doing some of the most creative design work that we have seen in our retail environment. So we want to make sure that we address the tenants' needs, because ultimately they are the ones that are paying the freight for working in these shopping centers. They're the ones we have to make successful within our retail experience. The shopping center is becoming lifestyle-oriented, and these retail environments represent an extension of that lifestyle, and we need to be able to reflect it in the design of the retail environment. Communal dining is becoming a very important piece of the shopping center today. It's not just your typical food court that we have experienced in the 80s and 90s. It is really becoming a dining experience. And if you go to many of these mixed-use projects throughout Asia, it is a place where families will go eat, and places where people enjoy their leisure time. We also have to start looking at the new anchors in our developments. They are these anchors that we haven't heard of before, and they're starting to come into our retail environments. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk.